Meta, thank you for joining me here for this Testing Insights episode. Give me a brief introduction of yourself and why you're relevant, what you've been up to with regards to experimentation program management over at Fanatics.
Thanks for having me, Ben. At Fanatics, over the last 6 years, we have grown our experimentation program, I want to say by a scale of 10x. When I first started, we used to do, maybe about 5 to 10 tests a month. And now we're at a point where we're doing between 50 to 70 tests a month. And, just in terms of scaling, not just the testing volume, but also our program processes, the tooling capabilities and the data management side of things, and that's why, I said that we're scaling it like 10x, but I think overall it's been such a great learning experience, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this information with you and with your audience as well. So.
Yeah, thanks, Meta. The scaling part in particular is what I want to geek out on. And so I've got 3 questions related to the scaling. The first one is, when we started having the conversation, you told me about the scaling and the 10x, and you mentioned that you're doing a lot of automation work. So can you tell me a little bit about where you're focusing your experimentation automation efforts in particular to have the biggest impact? Maybe like 1 or 2 examples of that.
Absolutely. So I would like to lay it out in like kind of 3 components. So I think the data automation and the data and analytics piece is where we've made the most progress to date. We've focused heavily for the last 3 or 4 years on making sure we have automated data pipelines. Every experiment we run, we have the data flows from Omniture, from our internal order data and everything flow together and create these dashboards that are literally at the click of a button, and I have access to about 200 to 300 metrics on each of my experiments, and so that has been our focus as a program. But as we kind of grow, one of the emerging areas of focus has been roadmap and program management. How do we make sure that we're utilizing the traffic that is on our site every, we don't want to we kind of call it like wasting traffic. If you're not testing on the traffic at any given point of time, it's like literally you're letting that traffic go. And so, at Fanatics, we have about 300 domains, to play with. We test only on the top 7 to 8 domains. And now we're kind of expanding to potentially the top 20 or so. But really the goal is, from an automation standpoint, how can we automate the roadmap? How can we make sure that whenever there's an opening on a certain page, on a certain domain, the next test just kind of slots into its spot, and then right now it's like this giant spreadsheet, of like testing bandwidth that we have to play around with. And it's like a huge effort, on the team. But I'm trying to look into areas where we could actually automate that process itself. I think that would be a huge efficiency gain for us. And I think, the other area that we've kind of made some progress on, but we're really interested in is the tooling side of things, where, ideally in a perfect world, what would happen is that we would be able to set up an experiment, do a preview, like a live preview, so that, whenever, like I said before, whenever that opening comes up on a site, the test just kind of becomes live, and like nobody's sitting there manually pushing the buttons, to make the test live and to collect the data and do all of these things, so we kind of preset a lot of these, and as and when the openings come up, we slot those tests in. We actually made some success on automating the preview functionality, because we actually have an internal in-house tool for this. So we're making some inroads there. We're right now also working on creating what we're calling stopping rules. So what makes sense? What are the business rules? That we could code in that would say that an experiment is ready to be stopped, and and then then it kind of goes through the analysis phase. But yeah, from a stopping perspective, if we were able to code that in, then that would automatically increase our bandwidth, right? Because we're not like spending a lot of time making those decisions up front, where we actually do today.
What I hear there is like you've got automation around the metrics and the metric reporting, but then there's also this sort of watchtower side of things, which you're looking to push on next. Like, how do you do the swim laning? How do you do that automatic slotting? A lot of times you need sort of the decision framework on the front end to be determined, almost like a pre-mortem. And it depends on the type of test that it is. So is it an iterative optimization goal test, or is it more of a disruptive test that the goal is learning? Your pre-mortem and the metrics and the decision framework, it totally pivots on that. And that's where the watchtower gets really hard to automate, and the swim laning. Like, I'm fascinating what you're pushing on there. My second question, I mean, thinking about going up to 50 tests a month at that scale, I imagine systematically learning and iterating on 50 tests a month can get difficult. Can you speak to your processes in which you're using to deal with that?
So this is an area I'm very passionate about personally, and I think it hinges on this concept of, your next win lies in your previous win, or, it's this kind of testing, know-how about, like, if you've tested in certain areas and they've proved to be effective, you're bound to find more, in those areas, or in kind of circles of influence around those areas. And so we actually, a bulk of our time every month is spent on analyzing the tests. So we have like a review process where the testing strategists put a test together. I and a couple of people on my team, like, we spend a lot of time reviewing those tests. And not only that, we actually also put in a decent amount of effort in actually suggesting iterations or ideas around those tests. And then what happens is, for each test, we have like a pretty detailed next steps section. And then those next steps actually go right back into the testing backlog. And then, they're again prioritized and scoped. And, the good news is, a lot of the times when a test is already built for testing, and, because we have an internal testing platform, and the tech team actually builds all our tests for us. All our tests are in the form of settings, so like we actually have settings that are literally like a switchboard, which we can turn on and off. And because of that, any iterations that we do on stuff, a lot of the times we're actually able to do those straight out of the gate. We could just like suggest something and say, like, hey, you don't want to say daily deals, you want to say best deals or top deals, then that's what we should test. And it's very easy. It's not like additional dev work needed at that point. And so we have a pretty involved process where we make sure that we have at least 2 to 3 iterations on each experiment that we run. And so that information flows back into the backlog, and whether it's a win or whether it's a learning, it gets iterated on. And so at any given point of time, if the tech backlog, where the new ideas and new features that get built at any given point of time, if that slows down, because they're busy with other things, we have like a flourishing kind of rich backlog of test ideas that we could go execute. And I think to date, about 50%, I would say, of our wins actually come from these iterations. If you had asked me a few years ago, if that's what I would, I don't think I would have guessed that. So I think it's just a huge. I think it's a huge challenge, but at the same time, it's very interesting to see, how we kind of end up, and then we also, I think that process also helps us not kind of settle down on, this thing won, so like we're gonna be okay with this. It kind of helps us to constantly improve and optimize, whatever, and constantly question our assumptions about things as well.
I like that the next steps automatically flowing into backlog. And then your own platform allowing almost a feature build toggle switch setup to reduce, next step debt loads and things like that. That's great. Really good stuff. So my last question, you've in the last few years, you've scaled from 10 to 50 tests a month. What are your top 3 struggles in scaling right now? And this one's a really broad question. Is it people? Is it that platform setup that you talk a lot about? Is it that process that you talked a lot about as well? Like, what's the top 3 that come to mind?
I think it's this classic struggle of like time, versus, and the resources and things like that. I think that some of the areas of opportunity for our program in particular is, we spend a lot of time doing test analysis. Like I said, I mean, there's always, every month, there's some curveball or the other, of tests which come our way, and our automated dashboards are not able to handle that, and then we end up like doing a lot of ad hoc work, trying to trying to understand those questions. And so really, a lot of this extra time gets spent on the test analyses and decision making around certain tests. And so that's one of the areas of opportunity. I feel like, we really should like start to streamline. I think, if I look back just a year or 2 ago, like I think the tech feature ramp took a long time. So like, for us to get the steady stream of tests from tech, and for us to sort of, like ramp up our testing velocity, that took a little bit of time. So like, if you call it like agility, like just kind of getting a test out and all the way, to actually measuring it. But now, like I said, because of this iteration muscle that we've built, we actually have stream of tests, and so we're able to be a lot more quick on our feet. If something doesn't come out in the release, then we are able to slot something else in its spot, and I think that really helped us. I think though also, like I said before, the program management aspect, so we actually created a program management arm, to help manage the processes. So earlier, we just had like the testing strategist structured in a way that, they would just basically own a test and take it end to end, do the road mapping and do the analysis and everything. Now we're realizing like, hey, you know what, we need to sort of disaggregate some of these functions. And so we have somebody that's uniquely just focused on making sure that the roadmap runs smoothly, and we have an efficient utilization of our traffic. We also have a team that helps us with analytics of our tests, so it's not the testing strategist doing all the work that, like just one person kind of, all doing all of it, which, my team is really talented, and so they're able to do that, but it's just not efficient in terms of time, so it's I think some of those gains that we've made in efficiency have helped us a lot, but I think those are also the areas where, I think there's more to be had.
In the beginning, the decision efficiency and decision framework was the first one, and that one's interesting because I go back to that pre-mortem thing, the different types of tests. If you can from the beginning understand what you're going to do, if then and that, sort of have that flow chart, it speeds up that decision towards the end. And then your second point is great on the program management, the disaggregation. We just realized that as an agency, we started hiring specific project managers. We don't want them to be in a track to be a consultant, or they don't want to be a strategist. They just want to make the train run on time.
The one thing I would also add is, just last year, since you brought up the decision framework, just last year, we invested a lot of time and effort in actually looking inwards and codifying, a lot of the decisions that we were making as a team, kind of just inherently, we were just making those decisions, but then we actually started writing down on paper, like, why, what were the attributes of those decisions, and what, like, so that I could take literally like a rule book and then pass it on to anybody, or or even pass it, codify it into the computer and have, and build those rules into my tool, and so like one of the things we did is we call it an analytics framework, where we basically decided, these are the tests that categorize as P1s, P2s, P3s, and P3, then like, okay, the barrier is really low. We're just gonna, if it doesn't do well, we know it's an experimental thing and we're just gonna shut it off. Like, no, like a lot of additional analysis needed, and this is this concept of being efficient, spending our time where it's most needed, and things like that, and so we're currently in the process of doing business rules around every single aspect of our, of our program. And, this is again, the same thing where, can we just make the rules such that a computer can consume them, and then we could just start to automate this stuff.